That sweet chocolate smell was the last thing the children would ever breathe, and nobody knew it yet. Mrs. Peterson watched as 18 excited third-graders bounced off the school bus, their voices echoing through the parking lot of Sweetland Chocolate Factory. The red brick building loomed before them, with its cheerful yellow sign and cartoon mascot waving from above the entrance. What could go wrong at a place that made children's dreams come true? "Stay together, everyone," she called out, counting heads one more time. 18. Perfect. The factory tour guide, a middle-aged man with a stained apron and tired eyes, greeted them at the entrance. "Welcome to Sweetland. I'm Mr. Morrison, and today you're going to see how we make magic happen." But there was something off about his smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. The children pushed through the glass doors, their sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The smell hit them immediately, rich, warm chocolate mixed with something else, something metallic that Mrs. Peterson couldn't quite identify. "This way, kids," Mr. Morrison said, leading them down a bright hallway lined with pictures of happy families enjoying Sweetland products. "We'll start with the cocoa processing area." Tommy Chin raised his hand. "Can we eat the chocolate right off the machines?" Mr. Morrison's laugh sounded hollow. "Oh, you'll get plenty to eat, don't worry about that." They entered the first production area, where massive machines churned and hummed, processing raw cocoa beans into smooth, flowing chocolate. The noise was incredible, so loud that the children had to shout to hear each other. "Everyone stay behind the yellow line." Mrs. Peterson yelled over the machinery. But kids being kids, some of them crept closer to get a better look. Sarah Williams pressed her nose against the safety glass, watching the chocolate waterfall cascade into huge vats below. "It's like Willy Wonka," she squealed. That's when Mrs. Peterson noticed something strange. The factory workers weren't acknowledging them at all. Not even a glance. They moved like robots, focused entirely on their tasks, completely oblivious to 18 excited children in their workspace. "Weird," she muttered under her breath. Mr. Morrison clapped his hands. "All right, everyone. Time to move to the packaging area. This is where the real magic happens." They walked down another corridor, this one dimmer than the last. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls. Mrs. Peterson counted heads again. Still 18. The packaging area was a maze of conveyor belts, wrapping machines, and assembly lines. Chocolate bars moved along the belts like tiny soldiers marching to war. The children spread out, fascinated by the mechanical ballet unfolding before them. "Can anyone tell me what happens if a chocolate bar falls off the conveyor belt?" Mr. Morrison asked. Little Marcus Johnson raised his hand. "It gets thrown away?" "Not exactly," Mr. Morrison said, that strange smile returning. "It gets recycled." But what Mrs. Peterson saw next would change everything she thought she knew about recycling. She watched in horror as a chocolate bar tumbled off the belt, rolled across the floor, and disappeared through a small opening in the wall. But it wasn't just the chocolate bar that caught her attention, it was the sound that came from behind that wall. A sound that definitely wasn't machinery. It sounded like whimpering. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, but he was already moving the children toward the next station. "Now we're going to see where we add the special ingredients," he announced. "This is usually off-limits, but today's your lucky day." The children cheered and followed him toward a set of double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Mrs. Peterson hesitated. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. She did another head count as they walked. 1, 2, 3, wait. She counted again. 17. Where was Emma Rodriguez? "Emma," she called out. "Emma." But her voice was swallowed by the noise of the machinery. Mr. Morrison had already pushed through the doors with the remaining children. Mrs. Peterson's heart began to race. She looked back down the corridor they'd just walked. Empty. No sign of the little girl with the bright pink backpack and pigtails. She ran to catch up with the group, pushing through the double doors into a room she immediately wished she'd never entered. The special ingredients room was darker, older, and smelled nothing like chocolate. The walls were lined with large metal containers, each one labeled with symbols instead of words, strange symbols that looked ancient, almost ritualistic. They reminded Mrs. Peterson of hieroglyphs, but wrong somehow, as if they'd been designed to hurt the eyes of anyone who looked at them too long. The room felt much older than the rest of the factory, like it had been here long before Sweetland was built around it. The ceiling was higher, disappearing into shadows, and the walls were made of old stone instead of modern brick. Industrial pipes ran along the walls, dripping with condensation that fell with rhythmic plips into puddles that reflected the dim lighting. In the center of the room sat a massive mixing vat, easily 20 feet across and just as deep. Ancient-looking machinery surrounded it, gears, pulleys, and mechanical arms that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a working factory. Everything was stained with chocolate, but the chocolate here was different, darker, almost black, with a texture that seemed to move on its own. "Where's Emma?" Mrs. Peterson demanded, grabbing Mr. Morrison's arm with a grip that surprised both of them with its strength. Her teacher instincts were in full alarm mode now. He looked at her with those dead eyes, and for a moment, his facade of friendliness completely disappeared. "Emma? I'm sorry, I don't know who you're talking about." But it wasn't just that he was lying. Mrs. Peterson could tell when someone was lying to her after 12 years of teaching. It was something much worse. That's when Mrs. Peterson realized something that made her blood run cold. Mr. Morrison genuinely didn't remember Emma at all. She looked at the children gathered around the massive mixing vat, their faces lit by the eerie glow coming from whatever was bubbling inside. Counted again, more frantically this time. Definitely 17. But when she tried to remember which child was missing, her mind went blank for a terrifying moment. Emma. Emma Rodriguez. Yes, that was her name. The girl with the pink backpack and pigtails who loved to read and always volunteered to help clean the classroom. But why couldn't she picture the girl's face clearly anymore? Why did it feel like trying to remember a dream? "Kids, stay exactly where you are," she said firmly, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. No signal. Of course. But worse than that, when she looked at her recent photos, the ones she'd taken of the children boarding the bus that morning, there were only 17 children in the picture. As if Emma had never existed at all. But she remembered Emma. She remembered her mother dropping her off early, remembered Emma's excitement about seeing how chocolate was made, remembered checking her permission slip twice. Emma Rodriguez. 4th row, 3rd seat. Always raised her hand. Loved chocolate chip cookies. So why was there no trace of her anywhere? Mr. Morrison continued his tour as if nothing had happened, gesturing grandly at the metal containers. These ingredients have been used in our chocolate for generations. Some of them are quite rare. Difficult to obtain. Expensive to maintain. 10-year-old David Kim, brave as always, peered into one of the containers through a small viewing window. His face immediately went pale. "What's in this one? It smells funny. Like my grandmother's house after she died." "That's our most precious ingredient," Mr. Morrison said, his voice taking on an almost reverential tone. "We call it childhood essence. Very difficult to obtain. Very potent. A little goes a long way." Mrs. Peterson felt sick. The room was spinning slightly, and she realized that whatever they were breathing in here was affecting her ability to think clearly. "We need to leave. Now." But when she turned toward the door they'd entered through, it wasn't there anymore. Just a solid wall with peeling paint and water stains that looked suspiciously like they might spell out words if you looked at them long enough. "Looking for something?" Mr. Morrison asked, and for the first time, his smile looked genuinely happy. Not the practiced happiness of a tour guide, but the genuine pleasure of someone who had just won a game they'd been playing for a very long time. The children were starting to notice something was wrong too. Little Sophie Anderson tugged on Mrs. Peterson's sleeve. "Mrs. Peterson, I can't remember how we got here." "Me neither," whispered Jake Thompson. "And, wasn't there supposed to be more of us?" But what happened next would prove that forgetting was the least of their problems. The mixing vat in the center of the room began to bubble and churn, even though no one had turned it on. The chocolate inside wasn't the normal brown color, it was darker, almost black, with swirls of something that looked suspiciously like. "Is that hair?" gasped Ashley Martinez, pointing at the vat. Mr. Morrison's laugh echoed off the walls. "Oh, children. You ask such wonderful questions. Yes, it is hair. Among other things." Mrs. Peterson grabbed the nearest children and pulled them toward her. "Everyone hold hands. Now." But as they formed their protective circle, she counted again. 16. Another child was gone, and she couldn't remember who. The worst part? Neither could the other children. It was as if whoever disappeared had never existed at all. The factory workers from the other rooms began filing into the special ingredients room. Up close, Mrs. Peterson could see they weren't quite right. Their movements were too stiff, their eyes too glassy, and their skin had a waxy pallor that reminded her of chocolate. "You see," Mr. Morrison said, walking slowly around their huddled group, "Sweetland has been making the most delicious chocolate for over 50 years. But recently, we discovered that the best chocolate, the kind that makes children beg their parents to buy more, requires a very special ingredient." "We want to go home," whispered Chloe Davis, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, but you are home," Mr. Morrison replied. "This is where you belong now. Where you'll help us make the sweetest chocolate in the world." Mrs. Peterson was about to discover the horrifying truth about what really made Sweetland chocolate so irresistible to children. The workers were closing in now, their movements synchronized like a macabre dance. Mrs. Peterson noticed that each of them wore a name tag, but the names were faded, barely legible. She squinted at the closest one, Jenny. Class of 1987. Her blood turned to ice. That worker, that thing, had been a child once. A child on a field trip, just like hers. "The process is quite simple," Mr. Morrison explained, as if you were still giving a normal factory tour. "We take the essence of childhood, the joy, the wonder, the innocence, and we infuse it into our chocolate. It's what makes our candies so appealing to young palates." "You're insane," Mrs. Peterson whispered. "Am I? Have you ever wondered why children prefer certain candies? Why they can tell the difference between our chocolate and the competitors? It's because we use only the finest ingredients." The mixing vat bubbled louder now, and Mrs. Peterson could see shapes moving within the dark chocolate. Shapes that looked disturbingly human. She counted her students again. 15. But just when all hope seemed lost, Mrs. Peterson noticed something that could change everything, if they could survive long enough to use it. On the wall behind Mr. Morrison, partially hidden by shadows, was an old emergency exit sign. The kind with the running figure and the arrow. But this one was different. It was covered in what looked like children's handprints, pressed into the metal in what might have been chocolate, or blood. More importantly, she could see a faint crack of light coming from behind it. "Children," she whispered as quietly as she could, "when I say run, you run toward that exit sign. Don't look back, don't stop, don't think. Just run." But Mr. Morrison heard her. His head snapped toward her with an unnatural speed, and his smile grew wider than any human smile should. "Oh, Mrs. Peterson. Did you think we hadn't thought of that?" The exit sign flickered and went dark. The crack of light vanished. "You see, many teachers before you have tried to leave. Mrs. Johnson in 1987. Mr. Williams in 1994. Mrs. Chin in 2001. They all thought they could save their students." He gestured toward the workers surrounding them. "Some of them are still here, actually. Would you like to meet them?" One of the workers stepped forward, removing her hair net. Mrs. Peterson gasped. The woman was young, too young to have been teaching in 1987. But her eyes held the weight of decades. "Hello," the worker said in a voice like grinding gears. "I'm Mrs. Johnson. I brought 22 third graders here 36 years ago. What Mrs. Johnson said next would reveal the most terrifying truth of all. "They're still here too," Mrs. Johnson continued, her dead eyes focusing on Mrs. Peterson's terrified face. "They never age in the chocolate. Never grow up. Never leave. They just become ingredients." Mrs. Peterson counted her students again, tears blurring her vision. 14. But this time, she noticed something else. The children weren't just disappearing, they were changing. Their skin was taking on a waxy sheen, and their movements were becoming slower, more mechanical. "The transformation is beautiful, isn't it?" Mr. Morrison said. "Soon they'll be part of something greater. Something that brings joy to children all over the world." Young Timothy Walsh looked down at his hands and screamed. His fingers were turning brown, hardening, becoming the texture of chocolate. "Mrs. Peterson! Help me!" She lunged toward him, but one of the workers, a man whose name tag read Mr. Williams, class of '94, grabbed her arm with strength that felt inhuman. "There's no fighting it," he said in that same mechanical voice. "I tried to fight it too. For years, I fought it. But eventually, you realize that this is better. No more lesson plans. No more parent conferences. No more wondering if you're making a difference. You're killing children." Mrs. Peterson screamed. "We're preserving them," Mr. Morrison corrected. "In the most delicious way possible." But in that moment of despair, Mrs. Peterson remembered something that could still save them all. The emergency chocolate shut-off valve. Every factory had one, it was federal law. If she could find it and trigger it, maybe the transformation process would stop long enough for them to escape. She scanned the room desperately while pretending to struggle against Mr. Williams' grip. There, in the corner, painted the same color as the wall but still visible if you knew what to look for. A red lever marked emergency stop. But she'd have to get past 6 transformed workers and Mr. Morrison to reach it. And she was down to 13 students now, with more of them showing signs of the chocolate transformation by the minute. Little Maria Santos was crying chocolate tears. Actual chocolate tears that hardened as they hit the floor. "Please," Mrs. Peterson begged. "They're just children." "They're ingredients now," Mr. Morrison said simply. "The finest ingredients money can't buy." The mixing vat's bubbling grew more violent, and something rose to the surface. Something that looked like a small hand, reaching up before disappearing back into the dark chocolate. Mrs. Peterson closed her eyes and made a decision that would either save her remaining students or doom them all. What she did next had never been attempted in 50 years of factory operations, and it would either work perfectly or kill them all instantly. She bit down on Mr. Williams' chocolate-hardened hand as hard as she could. The taste was sickeningly sweet, but it worked. He let go with a shriek that sounded more mechanical than human. "Run to the red lever," she screamed to her students. "All of you, now!" Chaos erupted. The children, even those partially transformed, bolted toward the corner. Mrs. Peterson tackled Mr. Morrison, surprising him with her desperation-fueled strength. But the workers moved faster than humans should be able to move. They cut off most of the children, herding them back toward the mixing vat like sheep. Only 2 students made it to the lever, brothers Jake and Luke Morrison, no relation to their captor, just a cruel coincidence. "Pull it!" Mrs. Peterson screamed as Mr. Morrison's hands wrapped around her throat. His grip felt like hardening chocolate, sweet-smelling but deadly. Jake grabbed the lever with both hands and yanked down with all his 8-year-old strength. Nothing happened. "It's stuck!" Luke cried, adding his weight to his brother's effort. The lever moved slightly, but decades of disuse had made it nearly impossible to operate. Meanwhile, the mixing vat was now overflowing, sending rivers of dark chocolate across the floor. Where the chocolate touched the partially transformed children, their conversion accelerated. Mrs. Peterson was losing consciousness. Mr. Morrison's chocolate grip was hardening around her windpipe. But then she heard it, a loud clank as the boys finally managed to pull the emergency lever. The emergency shutdown triggered something that hadn't happened in the factory for 50 years, and what came next would shock everyone, including Mr. Morrison. Every machine in the factory ground to a halt. The mixing vat stopped bubbling. The conveyor belts froze. And most importantly, the transformation process reversed. The workers, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Williams, and all the others, suddenly looked around in confusion. The glassy stare left their eyes, replaced by recognition, horror, and 50 years' worth of suppressed memories. "Oh God!" Mrs. Johnson whispered, looking at her hands. "What have I done? What have we all done?" Mr. Morrison released Mrs. Peterson and staggered backward. For the first time since they'd arrived, he looked genuinely afraid. The dark chocolate in the mixing vat began to bubble again, but differently this time. Things were rising to the surface, personal items, pieces of clothing, and the missing children, Mrs. Peterson gasped, realizing the truth. "They're still in there. They're still alive." The chocolate began to drain away through emergency outlets that had activated with the shutdown. As the level dropped, they could see shapes at the bottom of the vat. Human shapes. Small human shapes. "How many children?" Mrs. Peterson demanded, grabbing Mr. Morrison by his stained apron. "How many children are in there?" But Mr. Morrison couldn't answer. He was staring at the vat in horror, as if seeing it clearly for the first time in decades. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Hundreds," she said. "Maybe thousands. Every field trip for 50 years." The chocolate continued to drain, revealing the impossible truth. The children weren't dead, they were preserved, suspended in a state between life and death, their essence extracted but their bodies intact. And as the chocolate level dropped below their heads, they began to cough, to breathe, to cry. Including Emma Rodriguez, who looked up at Mrs. Peterson with chocolate-covered pigtails and asked, "Mrs. Peterson, are we going home now?" Mrs. Peterson counted her students as they climbed out of the vat, helped by the newly awakened former workers who were crying as they lifted each child to safety. 18. All 18 were accounted for. But as they prepared to leave through the emergency exit that Mrs. Johnson had managed to unlock with her restored memories, Mrs. Peterson looked back at the factory one more time. On the wall, she saw a plaque she hadn't noticed before: Sweetland Chocolate Factory, bringing sweetness to the world since 1974. The same year the first group of children had gone missing from Lincoln Elementary. The same year her own class photo had been taken. The same year she remembered visiting a chocolate factory on a field trip she'd somehow forgotten until now. Mrs. Peterson looked down at her hands and felt her heart stop. They were starting to turn brown. But was it really the end? Or was this just another cycle in a story that had been repeating for 50 years?